Hi, I'm Samantha Leones with the Duesenberry River Teen Advisory Board, and today we are here at the Tucson Festival of Books 2018, and we are interviewing Holly Black. So, Holly, you've written a lot of books, and you're a best-selling author. So, from writing your first book until now, what do you think has most changed? And is there anything that you're continuously improving?
You mean what has most changed in me personally, or like in the industry?
In your
or
writing
in
style.
my writing? So partway through my career, I wrote a series of books called The Curse Workers, which are kind of magical mobster books. And when I was writing them, I studied a lot of mysteries and a lot of noir and a lot of cons. I read a lot of books that showed how people perpetrated cons, which was great because I am very easily conned. So it was really useful. But it really changed the way that I approached story. I think I thought very differently about how you can con the reader and how you can bring the reader along. And I've always loved surprise in books. I've always loved the feeling of, unpredictability about a book doing something that you didn't know it was going to do, but that you liked. And I think that I changed my approach after that. That was a big change in how I plotted. And I think over time I wanted to do things that I haven't done before, which pushes me in different directions, with The Cruel Prince. Even though I've written a lot of fairy books, this is the first book that takes place almost entirely in fairy. And part of the reason that I wanted to do that was that I hadn't done it before. So to try and keep the stories feeling fresh for me and feeling exciting for me.
Is there anything that you're continuously improving besides making everything fresh and new?
I think, as I get older and become hopefully a person who knows different things about the world, I want to try and write books that are both better and also I have more and different things to say. And I guess that is something that I keep trying to, make my books more in line with the things that I really love and the things that I don't know. It's a great question, but I think the thing is you want to be better in every way, right? And you hope that you are.
Okay, so you've written a co-series with Cassandra Clare. How different is the process of co-writing a book?
Well, in my case, it's very different because I often write an outline then deviate from the outline. But Cassie mostly sticks to the outline. So when I co-write with Cassie, she makes me stick to the outline, mostly. Occasionally, I have talked her into a really bizarre twist that she didn't know was coming. But mostly we do that. And we have a method of writing where I will write about 400, 500 words and hand the computer to her. We'll be in the same physical space. And then she'll actually write over the words. So she'll edit them, she'll change them. She will often add more because that's her way. And then she'll write 500 words and she'll give them back to me. And I'll cut them down because that's my way and write over them. And so, ideally, it'll mean that Cal has a unified voice because they're all from his point of view. And a lot of times when you're co-writing, you'll write different chapters so that you can have different voices. But because we chose not to, we have to keep the voice the same. And so that's how we write. So it's a very different way than writing on my own. But I think every co-writing experience is different from one another.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Samantha Mathis. I'm a student at Basis Tucson North, and I wanted to know, how do you come up with the names of your books and characters?
A couple ways. One is I will think about names that either, in terms of the fairy book, sometimes there's folkloric names, like Nick Nevin, which is from a poem. And then, so sometimes you sort of get names in that way in terms of doing research. And then sometimes I will take a name that I'm familiar with and add a bunch of letters to it and try and make it sound a little different. And so that it has, a sense of the different, but also a sense of the familiar. And then also there's a baby name site called Nameberry, which I really love. It's and I love it because it has user lists. and clearly has been, I mean, it's possible that the list of vampire names are just people who really want to name their kids after vampires, but mostly I think that the usernames are in part writers who have then made lists that are very useful, and it'll suggest names that you might like if you like a certain name. So highly recommend, very good, not just for the names that you get, but to send you in directions that you might not have thought to go.
And we've noticed that you write a lot about siblings. Like, what influenced you in this way?
Well, I had a sister. My sister died when she was 23. But growing up with her certainly, gives me a sense of what it's like to have a sibling, and also like to make siblings important in my life. And I think losing her also makes me conscious of the things you don't have. I have the strange experience of being both a person with a sibling and an only child. And I think that has influenced the way I write about siblings.
My name is Harlow, and I'm a student at Rincon High School. And I wanted to ask, do you have other interests or hobbies that impact your writing?
I think that writers in general are people who are obsessed with weird things, and I'm no different. I have periodic obsessions where I will go and research a topic that has no particular relevance to what I'm working on at that time, and then often has a relevance later in ways that I don't expect. But I think that rather than I think that the things that show up in writing are not always the things that you think. Like, I watch a lot of really bad reality television, like not the kind of good kind where you're like, oh, that seems sort of respectable, like really bad reality television. And when I was writing Coldest Girl in Cold Town, which is my vampire book, I found myself thinking a lot about how there were a couple of reality shows where someone on the show died. And in one case, the show stopped airing. They pulled the show. The circumstances were complicated. And, it's that moment when real reality bumps up against reality television. But then there's another show where they recut the season, so that became a storyline. And that made me think about, if you had a walled city full of vampires who were broadcasting out live feeds and somebody got eaten, would I watch it? Look, clearly it's my ideal show. Clearly this is the show I've been waiting for. And what is that, what would that be like? What would a world like that be like? And, you would not think that reality television would ever have an influence on a thing that you're working on, because it doesn't seem like those things go together. And so I think it's looking at the stuff you do and figuring out what it is that's interesting to you about it, more than, having a hobby that's actually useful or on the face of it useful.
Thank you. And the other question was, what are your favorite books or authors?
This is always a big, long list. I think the book that probably had the biggest influence on me was actually an illustrated book. It's Brian Froud and Alan Lee's book, Faeries. Beautiful book. Brian Froud, if you don't know him, did the concept art for the movies Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And Alan Lee did the concept art for Lord of the Rings. So you can imagine them sort of teaming up to make this terrifying book of fairies that my mom had when I was a kid. And it sent me down the rabbit hole of reading folklore. The Bordertown books that Terry Windling edited were a big influence on me. Charles DeLint, Emma Bull, Neil Gaiman, Ellen Kushner, Tanith Lee. They were probably, and then before that, the Wrinkle in Time books, Madeline L'Engle. Those books. So she also did a series of realistic fiction books called Meet the Austins, or at least so you think, because at some point the kids meet and it turns out that it's in the same universe all along. It totally blew my mind. And then I guess people working today, I am a big Megan Abbott fan who's a mystery writer. I have friends whose work I really admire, Lee Bardugo, Marie Lu. I don't know, there's so many people.
Hi, my name's Nikki. I'm a student at Basis Tucson North, and deals are a really big part of your book. Jude uses deals as a really great way to exert agency in a world that she doesn't have power within. So what deals have you had to make in publishing?
I love the idea of publishing deals being like fairy bargains
I think
where
of
you're
them as that.
where nothing is going to go well for you. Well, see, what Jude needed was an agent. And that is so when I first had a book, so I was talking a little bit before we started recording about my first book, which was Tithe, and it took me 5 years to write, and I had been going over it and rewriting it, and I had a couple of friends at the time who knew I was working on it but hadn't seen it, and one of them was Tony Dirtalizzi, who I would go on to do Spiderwick with, but at that time, we were buddies, and I finished the book and I gave it to him along with some other people, and he came back to me, and you could tell that he had thought the book would not be clearly would not be good. Like, he clearly thought it was going to be terrible, because he said this was good with a relief in his voice, a kind of insulting relief. And my friend, who was a children's librarian, thought that it was a YA book. And previous to that, I had thought it was an adult book, because I had grown up reading about 16-year-olds in adult books. It didn't seem that strange to me. And so he wound up passing it on to his editor, Kevin Lewis, to see if it was an adult book, and Kevin wound up acquiring it, and I had no agent. And I thought to myself, all I have ever wanted in my life is to be in publishing, and so whatever this contract is, I will sign it. And lo, I did. And I always say, this was a wonderful story, but don't do what I did, get an agent. Because indeed, many years later, my agent was still like, why did you sign that? Why didn't you come to me? Why weren't you like, all my rights? Sure, take them. I don't need them.
Well, that's a wonderful story. And sort of in the same vein, given the opportunity, what power would you want, and what would you be willing to give up for it?
I mean, ideally, I would give up as little as possible, right? But what I would really like is the ability to never be tired and never have to sleep. So it would be like there were two of me. And then I could definitely get more writing done.
But what would you be willing to give up for that?
I mean, what do you want?
Well, it has to be something important, because it's a lot of time that you're acquiring all of a sudden.
I mean, that seems like a good negotiating strategy on your part, but is it really that big a deal? I mean, really, you probably don't want anything that bad.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Vanya. I'm a student at University High School. And since The Cruel Prince is all about fairies, how much do you purposely stay loyal to fairy traditional folklore versus adding your own spin?
I try to not contradict folklore. And, one of the great pleasures about writing in Faerie is getting to draw on so much folklore, and, there are so many stories and so many creatures and so many permutations of Faerie and it's such a rich landscape that it's easy to work within it. With The Cruel Prince, because I was actually going into Faerie, though, there were a lot of decisions I had to make that meant I could no longer, go with the folklore and nothing more. I actually had to make up stuff and make decisions. And again, I came back to the idea that I just didn't want to contradict what was there. And to some extent, I wanted to match everything against the feeling of Faerie. Like, does this feel like Faerie? Does this feel numinous? Does this feel strange? And, I tend to think of Faerie as like there's, fairy food or fairy fruit. Once you taste it, everything else is dust and ashes in your mouth. And that, I always come back to that idea, the idea that, Faerie is so beautiful that it's ruining. And, so anything that I can make feel like that feels right to me.
Okay. You've had books being turned into movies with Spiderwick.
Mm-hmm.
And how is the process of making books to movies?
It's long and it's complicated. And, a lot of times, I don't know what's happening. It's happening behind the scenes because it's, a many $million production that has, that starts with, in Spider Case, myself and Tony and our project, but is in the hands of other people. And so it had a lot of starts and a lot of stops. It had a lot of screenwriters coming through, sort of getting takes, and then the studio deciding whether or not they wanted to go with that. The director, Mark Waters, was signed on early on, and he was there the whole time. But a lot of other things changed. And we kept getting sort of these calls where things were going to go well. It's going forward. It's totally going to be great. And then we would not hear from people for months and months and months. And then there was this time I was driving home from doing an event, and Tony called me, and he said that our film agent had called him, and it was on. It was greenlit. It was happening. And I went to the tiny liquor store in our town, Liquors 44, and I said, I want that bottle of Cristal. And they were like, I don't know if you really want that. It was like covered in dust up at the top. And they were like, that's kind of expensive. And I was like, give it to me. And I went to his house, and we opened the bottle, and we poured 2 glasses, and they called us, and they were like, it's back off. And I was like, how do I put this cork back in the bottle? And then 2 weeks later, it was on, and it was happening.
Did you have another glass at that point?
I mean, I think we drank our glasses, sadly, like drink our, but it was, it was that thing where you, until you're really walking around the set, by the time it had actually happened, once we were walking around the set, that was the first time it seemed real, because it had so many times when we thought it was happening and then it wasn't. But it was incredible. And to walk around the set, it was like walking around in one of his pieces of art. And, when I would see the kids do stuff, I had that weird feeling of like, I didn't, what are you doing when I'm not writing about you? Like, what else are you doing? It's a little eerie.
Would you ever consider making a movie with The Cruel Prince?
It was optioned by Universal. Again, because it's such an enormous and expensive undertaking, all I can do is sort of let them option it. Beyond that, I have to just keep my fingers crossed like everybody else that they're going to, actually make it, and that they're going to find the people who really want to put in the time to make it.
I'm going to read an excerpt from The Cruel Prince. Okay. I don't desire to do as well in the tournament as one of the Fae. I want to win. I do not yearn to be their equal. In my heart, I yearn to best them. Now, was there a point in your life where you felt the need to prove yourself to others?
Probably over and over again. I think that there's always points, right, where we're in a position where we hope that we can do something well. I mean, certainly, I always wanted to write a book and have it be published. It was a dream from the time I was a kid. And I didn't know anybody who had a artistic dream and done anything professional. My mom was a painter, but she didn't exhibit. I had friends, parents who were really talented in different things, but they, their jobs were not the art that they loved. And so, people always say, well, if you think you can do it, you can do it. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think I can do it. And, I often tell people that it's too much to ask of yourself, that you have to actually believe you can do it. Like, you just have to do it. And, you don't have to believe in it, because I didn't. And I think that's probably that's probably the thing that I come back to again and again, is a thing that I am continuously surprised that I managed to finish and sell that first book. Everything after that is sort of in a different space, but it was that first book that I thought, me? Really? I don't know.
Thank you. That was really inspiring, actually.
My name is Miriam, and I go to Catalina Foothills High School. Which of your characters in The Cruel Prince would you kiss, marry, and kill?
They're all terrible, aren't they? Well, she'd definitely marry Jude, because she's the person who is going to get me through that book, right? Somebody should probably kill Matic. I guess I'll kiss card.
I agree. Can you share with us any new excerpts or details about the next book other than the excerpt that came out recently?
Well, we definitely see a lot more of the undersea. We get to see some selkies and some merfolk. I told my husband that, and he did believe me. I had to show him the cover to prove that. I was like, look, it's the water. I'm telling you, there's merfolk in this book. So is there anything particular you want to know?
Anything you want to tell us is fine.
Well,
We'll take anything.
I think the first book is about, what you would do to get power, right? How far you would go to get power. And the second book is a lot about what you would do to keep it.
Will we see more of the human world in the next book?
You'll see more of the human world in the third book.
Okay. I'm crossing my fingers for that.
But I wrote so much. I mean, so many of my books are set in the human world, and in which Faerie bumps up against it, that it's fun to sort of have it the other way.
Oh, okay.
Well, we didn't practice a closing,
Oh.
so thank you so much for your time. And this has really been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for
it's
coming
been
out and talking to me.